talking today about the actions of a real mother. Look at verse 16. Then came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king, and they stood before him. This is King Solomon. Verse 17 says, and the one woman said, My Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day after that I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also. So they had very close proximity deliveries within their pregnancies. And this one woman says, halfway through verse 18, there was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. So somewhere in the middle of the night, this one mother rolled over on her little infant newborn and smothered the baby, and the baby died. And then on the other hand, the other woman that had a baby, about 3 days difference in age, and there was a newborn as well, was taking care of hers, and it was fine. And verse 19 is where we're at now. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. Verse 20, and she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while thy handmaiden slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. Now, can you imagine such a weird event as this? She was asleep. She switched the babies right after birth. Her baby was dead, and she's going to give it to the mother of the baby that was alive. Well, let's see what happens in verse 21. And when I arose in the morning to give suck to the child, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. Wow, what a horrifying experience. This is not my baby. I remember a little freckle on its left hand. I remember its little grimace on its eyebrow. This is not my child. Man, what a probleming circumstance. Look at verse 22. Now this is where the debate begins that ultimately leads up to the wisdom of the leadership of the man of God, Solomon. In verse 22, and the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No. But the dead is thy son, and the living is mine. Thus they spake before the king. So this situation got the attention of King Solomon. They said, well, you know what? We gotta resolve this dispute. That is my child. No, that is my child. The dead child is your child. Well, let's take it before the king. Now keep in mind, this is the first test of the wisdom of Solomon. The divine wisdom we want to put emphasis upon. How will Solomon deal with this? And what will Solomon discover? Let's read on. So as the women, we can say, and I'll inject this, the women brought the circumstance to the awareness of King Solomon. And in verse 23, it says, Then said the king, the one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is dead. And the other saith, Nay, but thy son is dead, and my son is living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Dustin, I don't know about you, but I'd run right backward when that came about. People don't like this story. It sounds unorthodox and strange. But God was in control. This is the same God that told Abraham to go sacrifice Isaac. God was in control. We studied in Sunday school today about the sovereignty of God. You want to define the sovereignty of God? It's real simple. We make it too complicated. It is God is in control totally in all things in the universe, in everything that we can comprehend. God is in control. God is on His throne. In Revelation 21 verse 6, He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. God has such sovereignty that within the realm of this we choose our own destinies. That is how large this fishbowl of God's is that we swim in. And God is in control of the water. He is in control of everything. They bring this circumstance to to the king, and the king gives him a very sobering revelation. As he sees the dispute between these two women, he looks over at one of his servants. He says, "Bring me a sword." The mothers must have been thinking, what in the world does this mean? We're going to cut this child in half, right down the middle. And we're going to give one half of the child to the mother, and we're going to give one half of the child to the other mother. Oh, we're studying today the actions of a real. Verse 24, "Bring me a sword." And they brought a sword before the king. Verse 25, "And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other." Verse 26, notice this verse. This is a power verse. "Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, divide it." Let's stop for a moment and let's look at a couple of points. As today in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16 through 28, we are discussing the actions of a real mother. We see Solomon's wisdom at work. We see this strange circumstance of a baby switched shortly after birth because the mother of a child that died wanted the baby that was still alive and switched him in the bosom of the mother that was asleep so that she would think her child was dead and the one that had the child that died could have a living child. Well, God would see right through this. What a strange way, but what a wise way to do it. The real mother, when confronted with splitting the baby, as ridiculous as that concept may sound, it was so elementary. It would bring out the true feelings, the broken heart of the true maternal instincts. And what happened was the real mother immediately felt it in her heart. The Bible calls it bowels, reins, the very inner works of an individual. The real mother said, "Oh my goodness, no." It yearned upon her son, she said. "Oh Lord, give her the living child." Here we see that the actions of a real mother, she was willing to let go, sacrificing everything for the security of her child. Folks, let me say something while I'm on this subject. Children should not have to sacrifice so that you can have the life you want. You should be the one sacrificing so your child can have the life that it should have. There's the problem in society. Now, I beat up on men on Father's Day. And ladies, I won't use the same term, beat up, but I am going to speak the truth this morning. There are too many people focused upon monetary gain and careers while their children are suffering at the hands of mothers that are seeking their dream while their child is the one wrongfully making the sacrifice. There is a major perversion of God's plan for women in the world today. And when I hang a much on the man for not being the rightful spiritual leader in the home, I am going to hang this responsibility on the mother because they are not showing the intended real love that God intended for them to have, and a sacrificial love that should be exemplified in their life for their children. But unfortunately, things in their life, their own pursuits, their own desires are coming ahead of their children. That didn't happen in this story. There ain't going to be a whole lot of amens out there, outside this church, in society, in the liberation movement, of which now we don't even have genders. That's how foolish and stupid we've become in society. But what I'm saying is the truth. Men, you got a responsibility to provide, protect, spiritual lead, be that rock within your family. Ladies, you got responsibilities. If you can't take care of them, don't have them. It's that simple. If you're going to have them, love them, sacrifice for them, give your life for them. This woman was willing to sacrifice everything, every desire, whatever it took. This alone in verse 26 resembles the kind of love that Christ had for us. Think about this. We can take it further on up the ladder. This is the kind of love God had for us. That He would send His only begotten Son, giving us the benefit of the doubt, giving us an option, saving us from destruction. He would sacrifice His own Son. I can't help but look at verse 26. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my Lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay him. This alone resembles God's level of sacrifice in exchange for the salvation of even an adopted son or daughter. Also, I want to bring a point out of verse 26 while we're on it. Speaking of a real mother would do anything to preserve the child's life. Note the words of the other woman. Did you see that? And I quote, let it be neither mine nor thine, but divided. That is a sick concept. What you see in that, gee whiz, I mean, talk about cold-hearted. What we see is the sound of a woman with absolutely no emotional ties to that child. I wonder if the people looking on at that point said, oh, Solomon, that's a good one there. Surely the real mother wouldn't say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's whack it in half. I'll show her. Real love doesn't behave that way. When I do weddings and I speak of the love chapter out of Corinthians where it says, love vaunteth not. Love is not selfish. Love is not prideful. Love is very humble. Love is out to do the right thing because truly, not lust, but love, true love, is the nature of God. God is love, absolutely. The very nature of God is sharing. That He gave His Son, that He gave of Himself. But we see the real mother's words more powerfully. She actually, listen to this, she begs for her child's life, even though someone else will benefit from it. Let's read on, verse 27. Now in verse 27, we see the king recognize this circumstance. And the king, King Solomon, answered and said, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. Now let me back up and add something into this as well. Even if the true birth-given mother, and this is a hard thought to even imagine, in some cases, there are mothers out there that would not be the birth-giving mother that might be the one that would have such a love as to rise above the one that, albeit she gave birth, she doesn't have a natural affection. And therefore, she would be the one to step up and say no, whatever it takes to save the child's life. And there is the adoptive mother's love. And you know what? That is the love that God shown toward us. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That He would give of His own. That He would do it to adopt us. Amen. He would let His only begotten Son, think about that for a moment, to take upon Him because of the capacity of His love, one that doesn't deserve it, one that He didn't, it was not of His flesh and bone, to take us into the adoption. Give us His name, And let Him be our rightful Father when His only begotten died. This is really more so not just a story about the real mother that gave birth, but the true emotions that God expects from a mother. The rightful love that God expects to be shown toward children today. I think of children neglected. I think of children that are just let go of in society. I think of the traffickers out there. I think of our southern border and the mess that's in. Tens of thousands of people. One place said there was as many as 20,000 children without parents now. And the sicko from the pits of hell, evil traffickers working for cartels and dopers out there snagging children, kidnapping them, and moving them around and selling them into child prostitution and all the unfathomable things that I don't even like to utter out of my mouth. This is from the pits of hell. Folks, if there is anything to invest in today, it is the children. It is the youth. And if anything, they depend on us. They watch us. And without us, there is nothing for them to watch. There is no one out there for them to be encouraged by. And if we are a bad influence, what is that doing to them? And if we do not have a natural affection, what does that leave them to share with others when it comes their turn to be the adult? The Bible said there will come a time when the love of many will wax cold. That people will lose their natural affection. We got mothers, as I had said, that things in their life are now more important than their children. I'm going to tell you right now, I get it. There are circumstances. And I don't want to get off and start badgering people's finances. You got to do what you got to do. But when you get to the point, you get to a certain point, folks, your children's got to come first. The kids have got to come first. Guys, it's time for you and I to grow up. It's time to be a spiritual leader. It's time to be the man of God. It's time to be the one that stands behind your wife, supports her, and stands behind the children. I look at sitcoms on television and the dads are now just goofballs. Which, of course, we live in a society where they've demasculated men and made them look like misfits, and women can work all roles and everything. This is just not right before God at all. When I was growing up, Ward Cleaver was a respectable dad in the family. And he was the guy that would say grace. He was the guy that was the breadwinner. And June Cleaver would take care of the kids. She had a natural love that was portrayed, and I know it was a show. But now we live in a society where the dad is this worthless idiot that puts his foot up on his footstool like Al Bundy or somebody. And he's just a joke. And the mother does everything. Well, you know what? In some cases, that's the truth. Shame on them guys. But you know what? We have become a victim of our own creation. And the ideology of the family that we think should be right. But God had a better plan in His book. And folks, that is what we need to go by. But let me get back on the subject, and then we're going to close out on some things. Lastly, I want you to notice something in this story. In verse 27, the king answered and said, "Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof." And verse 28, it said, "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment." What we see right here is a real mother. First, we said the real mother loves her children enough to keep them safe. Proverbs 31, the Proverbs 31 woman that Solomon spoke of in his writing, was one that was diligent in providing in ways that God blessed her with the ability to do and to be that mother. God gave you an ability to have children, and that is the greatest thing that He can give you in life. Why in the world would you not take something and esteem it in such a way as the greatest gift that God has given you? And you ladies here today, I know you have, but sadly that's not the case outside these doors in many corners of society. But if there is ever something that we need to look at and say, my goodness gracious, I want to stand out above and among all the other women. And that's what this one did. She didn't only do it for the safety. She didn't only do it and just to save the child's life, which was paramount, but she stood out above all the others. Here we see the divine imputed wisdom from God in Solomon's test. But here he sees the real mother. And I challenge you today to be that real mother that God entrusted you to be.